Okay, I've had the Sony A7 IV for a couple of weeks now, and I want to give my thoughts on one of the things that people seem to be getting bent out of shape about, and that's the 4K 60 frames per second mode. If you're not aware, the A7 IV, when you switch it into 4K 60 frames per second, adds a 1.5 times crop to your image. That's just the way that the camera is designed. There's nothing you can do to get around it. That's just how Sony made it. And a lot of people are getting bent out of shape about that because if this camera did not crop in their 4K 60 frames per second mode, it would kind of be like the best all-around camera that you could get for the money. Now, I'm no Sony executive or salesperson, so I can't anticipate exactly why they did this on this camera, but I can imagine it's because they didn't want to sort of undercut their more expensive cameras that have similar types of video features. And this is not something that's just common inside of Sony cameras. This is every single major camera manufacturer seems to have these little caveats built into these cameras, especially the ones that are around like the $2,000 to $3,000 mark. They have some really great features, and normally they borrow them from like the top flagship in that brand, but they always have some of these weird little caveats and quirks inside of them that you just need to consider whenever you go into purchasing a new camera. And the one big question you need to ask yourself, in particular with the A7 IV in the 4K 60 mode, is that 1.5 times crop a deal breaker for you? Now, some people are gonna say, absolutely, I need a full frame, 4K, 60 frames per second. That's understandable. You can actually get that. You're just going to need to spend about $1,000 more to get an A7S Mark III in order to get that nice full frame 4K 60 frames per second. But then the caveat there is that you don't have the nice juicy 33 megapixel sensor on the A7S Mark III in order to take some really high quality stills. Now, if you're someone who's still undecided on whether or not the 4K 60 crop is going to be a deal breaker for you as to whether or not you get this camera, let me offer up a couple of thoughts that might help you make a decision. Now, like I said earlier in this video, the 4K 60 crop is not a big deal to me. It's not a deal breaker in any sort of way because of my workflow and how I shoot, plan out, and edit my videos. And I actually saw a really interesting video from another YouTuber, George Holden. I'll leave a link down below so you can check it out. He made a really good point about if this crop mode is somehow a deal breaker, then there's something wrong with your workflow. And I think I tend to agree with that statement, that if you're a bit more planned out with your shots, then the 4K 60 crop is really not a deal breaker if you're able to plan it out ahead of time. Now, that's not to say that you can't just go around and use this camera run and gun style. I think that if you're trying to do that, we can move to the second thought as to why I think that this little quirk in this camera is not necessarily a deal breaker. If you're someone who tends to shoot a lot on wider angle lenses and you have that available to you, then having a slow motion that's punched in a little bit more really helps whenever you're trying to get more detailed type shots. And that's typically how I use my camera and how I shoot. I like to get my A-roll a lot of times with more of a wide field of view. And then for my B-roll, I like to get something that's a little bit more up close and more detail oriented. So for example, the lens I'm currently shooting on is the main lens that I've mostly been using with this A7 IV is the Tamron 17-28, which is a nice wide angle, full range for YouTube content, or if you're trying to get some wide establishing shots. However, when I go to shoot my B-roll with this lens, again, I like to get a little bit closer detail. This turns my lens from a 17-28 into a 25-42, which gets me closer to something kind of like a 50mm, which I think is kind of a sweet spot for getting more up close details. Likewise, I shoot a lot with my 35mm f1.8, which is like my favorite lens, and that's great. 35's, kind of close to what you're seeing with your own eyes. And when I'm going to get my B-roll shots, then that 35 becomes like 52, which is again a nice bit of change up, helps to give you some different perspective from more of your 24 frames frames or 30 frames, establishing shots into your 60 frame slow motion B-roll. So with the crop factor happening inside of the camera without me even switching lenses, it actually gives me a little bit more of a versatile setup with my lens, and then it gives me wider focal range and also tighter focal ranges without even having to switch up my lens setup. Now, don't get me wrong, I understand this crop factor is still going to be a big deal for some people, and don't throw the hate in the comments because I get that. But I think if you have the right workflow and you have some lenses that will give you a nice variety from using its full focal range to a cropped focal range, then I think that the A7 IV is a dynamite little camera for you, and that's going to give you a lot of these really great features with not having to spend as much money as like the A7S or the FX3 or anything like that. And you get all the amazing benefits of having a really capable photo camera. And for that reason, I think that this crop factor is not a deal breaker and still kind of makes the A7 IV the perfect camera, at least for me. So I'm curious to know in the comments down below, is this a big deal to you? What's your thoughts on the crop factor? Do you have a certain kind of workflow that works, or a lens setup or combo? Do you have other thoughts that I maybe haven't mentioned in this video? Well, let me know in the comments down below. While you're down there, you can check out the links to all the things that I use to make my videos, as well as Lightroom presets if that's what you're into. And also, if you got value out of this video, go ahead and add some value right back to it by hitting that like button, and also subscribe to this channel for more regular content like this. And don't forget to hit the bell so that way you don't miss out anytime I post a new video. Well, hey, until the next time, my name is Zach Sopak, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.